All right. Thank you guys so much. How y'all doing? Good, awesome. If you got a Bible, Romans chapter 3 is where we are, and a special welcome to all the Bayside campuses. So glad that you are with us in this series. If you are new to Bayside, a special welcome to you. My name is Mark, and man, I'm super excited to be doing this text. So here's the thing. Let me start with a question. What is the most important thing within Christianity? What is the core? What is the center of all things? What is the thing, like in our life when we have these moments where you're in the midst of a crisis and priorities rise to the top? I shared this story with Granite Bay campus last week, but you didn't get to see it if you're online or at any of our campuses. So I'm just gonna frame this question with this story, and sorry if you've already seen it. You can write, you can complain, just write at me at ray at baysideonline.com. And so when I was a kid, 19 years old, I wanted to cook some Kraft dinner one night, and I didn't know how to do that. And so I took a box of Kraft dinner, poured the dry noodles into a bowl, and just put it in the microwave, put it on for 9 minutes, and then ran to the shower, had a shower, and of course my shower was interrupted by an exploding microwave. It exploded, there was smoke pouring out of it. I ran out, I'm like, what is going on here? And of course, in that moment, out of all the things that I wanted to make sure I had, which would be what? My towel, all right? I'm running out. The priorities at that moment rise to the top. We want to make sure I got my towel so I'm not running my neighborhood naked, right? At the end of the day, when the fire hits and you got to take one passage with you in the whole Bible, what would it be? There is an argument to be made that it is the passage that we're talking about today. It is Romans chapter 3, verses 21 to 26. And if you got your notes, pull it out. As you can see, I've done a really good job this week of providing you with your fill in the blanks, all right? So this is me working really hard with the team to try to figure out how to do fill in the blanks and then just giving up, all right? That's what that is right there. So you have the text here. You can work through it in your notes, but Romans chapter 3, 21 to 28 is actually historically, Martin Luther called it the center of the whole Bible. One writer has said this is the greatest paragraph ever written. And so this, I would argue, is the one that goes to the desert island. If you want to really, really know what Christianity is about, at the center, at the core, put away all the complexities of everything else Christianity is, and you just want to hone into the simplicity of this thing, this is the text you would go to and say, okay, I'm gonna go to Desert Island, I'm gonna study this thing. So I brought the TV up here so you can kind of see, this isn't like a normal thing, but to really hone in and see, okay, how does this text unfold and what does it mean for our lives? And so this, usually with a text like this, I would take probably about 3 to 4 weeks, but I have 35 minutes. So you're saying, oh, then shut up and get started. Okay, chill out, relax, I'm trying. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 3 of Romans, verse 21 starts like this. But now, okay, stop right there. So this is why it takes a while. So here's the but now, and here's why it's important, all right? Paul, for verses 1 to 20, has been giving some really bad news about humanity, all right? He's been saying we're super sinful, we're messed up, there's disease, there's strife, there's disunity, there's all kinds of terrible things. You're a sinner, and all the bad news is coming down the line to the point where it's like, man, this book's getting quite depressing. It's telling us the Jews are sinful. It's telling us pagans are sinful. It's telling us I'm sinful. Things are a disaster. No one seeks God. It's getting depressing. And then he starts with this, but now. And I will argue this, that the word but is the greatest word in any language. I know that sounds weird to say. You're like, okay, but's the greatest. It's the greatest word in any language when all you've heard, when it follows a whole bunch of bad news, right? So here's the cancer diagnosis, but we can do something about it. Your spouse has been in an accident, but they're gonna be okay, right? That's what we're talking about. And so Paul goes, you are sinful, the world's a mess, it's a disaster, but don't worry, but now God has done something about it. God has moved. God has actually worked. This is like a linchpin, a pivot point of all this bad stuff, and now God has done something about it. And what he's done about it is he has not created a new ethic, a new philosophy, a new religion. He hasn't done anything the world has ever seen before or ever thought of. All of Eastern philosophy, Paul is about to say, has been wrong. All of Western philosophy has been wrong. Everything that humankind has come up with in order to deal with the problem of sin and our plight and our guilt and our shame, it's all wrong. And God did something else. God did something unique. God did something in the person and the work of Jesus that puts all of that in the past. God has actually created new wine, which makes all the old bottles irrelevant. He's done this crazy work in Jesus that you all need to hone in on and understand. This is what he's about to do. And then he says this, but now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known. Okay, the righteousness of God. This phrase right here in the original language, it's this complex phrase. I did a master's thesis on the book of Romans. I spent 3 months, picture this, fun times, reading about this phrase. 3 months. Literally 5 pages of my master's thesis is on this phrase right here. Because there's all kinds of debate. Depending on is it the righteousness from God? Is it the righteousness of God? Is it righteousness that he gives to us? What does the word righteous mean? It could mean justice, it could mean righteous, whatever. Here is what I think is going on here. He's saying this, among all that debate, because I won't bore you with it, he's saying, what I want to talk to you about now is the righteousness of God, meaning what one writer calls the covenant faithfulness of God. Because when you look around, remember the story began with Abraham. God was going to solve all of the problems of the world by calling Abraham and having this story unfold. And what's happened is we're all kind of looking around and we're wondering, did God actually do right? Is he just? Is he actually doing anything? There's still pain, there's still genocide, there's still things going on in the world. And I'm not sure God has actually been faithful to the covenant that he created with Abraham. And so what he's about to do is go, guys, the crazy thing is he has been faithful to that covenant, and he's arguing this all the way through the book of Romans. And the way he's been faithful to it is just different than everyone thought. Everyone thought it was gonna be all the Jews at the end of time doing this work and then rising from the dead to save the world. And instead of that, he took one Jew in the middle of time. And he died and rose again, and all of the justice and the faithfulness, the salvation of God actually was shown to the world. Now, here's the other piece about this phrase that I love, because Paul's going, man, I as a Jew had to go away and go, oh my goodness, God is totally just, but not in the way that we think, because he's been just in the person and work of Jesus. And here's what I mean by that. You know how some people are like, yeah, but is God really just? Look at the way the world is. Why isn't he coming back yet, right? You've probably heard those conversations. Lots of people love doing series on the end times every 6 weeks because everyone shows up and, I think it's the end times. I think this is about Russia, whatever. And people get all jacked up about that kind of stuff. And that's just like Christians love that stuff, right? Like your non-Christian neighbor doesn't give a rip about any of that. We love it, right? Christians are like, I can't believe it. Yeah, I didn't grow up in the church. My wife grew up in the church, so she was raised on all those movies where the rapture, the people are like shaving, and there's and the razor's like, like this was Christian horror movies, all right? This is like, oh my gosh, this is the airplanes are like, Christians love this stuff, right? They're jacked up, they think it's the end. Listen, here's what 2 Peter says about that. I remember coming into that culture, I was like, you guys are whacked, man. It's like, it's really the end. And I was like, really? It's 1990. So I came into the church in 1998, and it was the end. Like for sure, it was just around, because it was the millennium. The millennium was coming. So that whole church, they had generators, they had canned foods. They're like, when the computers flip over, we're all dead. I'm like, wow, you guys are nuts. But 2 Peter has this beautiful phrase where he says, do you want to know why Jesus hasn't come back yet? It's not because he doesn't know what's going on. It's not because God is distant. It's because he wants to give everybody time to repent. Listen, I come to Jesus in 1998 at 18 years old. You know what I'm glad of? Everyone's jacked up. Why isn't Jesus come back? Why isn't Jesus come? I'm glad he didn't come back in 1997, right? That's what I'm talking. We got to get out and do the work instead of sitting around with a bunch of Christians just talking about stuff that we already know. If you think Jesus is coming back, get out there and save some people, right? This is what he's talking about. If you really believe in the justice and the righteousness of God to the core of your being, then we got to get out and actually tell people about it. And then he says this. Notice this. This is the second point I want to make about this phrase. Of God. Notice, and I don't want to offend you because I know I'm the new guy around. Don't hate me too much. But notice the story ain't about you. Who's it about? It's God, man. I know you're reading in your devos, I'm in Leviticus 10 and I'm bored. Why? Because for 8 minutes it hasn't been about me. The Lord forbid he writes a book about him and not you. There are passages about you, yes, by inference and implication, but not every single verse is just aimed at you with your coffee for your 6 minutes in the morning. Sometimes he needs to go 20 verses in Exodus to talk about curtains because he's talking about his holiness, not yours. And you gotta be cool with that. I know it's hard. When we don't like this, we're acting, and again, immature. When we always want to make it about us. We're like kids. Like I remember taking my family to Disneyland a few years ago, and my daughter was like, I want to get on this ride, but it's a 2.5 hour wait. And I was like, 2.5 hours? And then it dawned on me, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go and stand in this line in order to show my daughters what sacrifice really looks like for an adult, for a parent. So I went and stood in that line. I said, you come back in 2.5 hours, baby. And I'm thinking, man, this is good parenting because now she'll go, goodness, this is what a parent looks like. You know how we think. So she shows up 2.5 hours later. Oh, thanks, Dad. Gives me a hug. No problem, baby. I said, listen, Sienna, you know the reason I did this? I did it because one day you're gonna have kids and you're gonna do this for your kids. And she's like, no, I won't. My husband will. I'm like, what's wrong with this woman? Right? How young do women learn this stuff? All right? That's how we sound, man. What is a child? A child is narcissistic, turned in on themselves. Make the story about me. I want it to be about me. I want to talk about me. And God's going, listen, this story is about me. And that's a good thing because that means the universe doesn't center around you. Just take a big breath of fresh air with that, right? Because that means you don't have to be perfect in your marriage, man. Right? Because you'll be like, look, look, he said it's about him. It's not about me. I don't know why all of a sudden I was a drunk voice, but your marriage, your money, right? It's about God and how your life can be used to point people to him, not yourself. And the mistake we make when we point people to ourselves is then when we fumble it, people mistake Christianity to think it's about Christians versus about Christ, and we have a whole generation of people walking away, and they say, well, it's the hypocrisy in the church that's making me walk away. I don't want to be a Christian because Christians have let me down. I don't want to be a Christian because I went to church, Christians pretended they were perfect, they weren't perfect, I found out and I walked away from the faith. And here's what yes, Christians, there was actually a study done a few years ago. There was a poll about the lifestyle activities of Christians, and it showed that they were statistically the same as non-Christians. So the poll asked about a series of activities and found that within the last 30 days, Christians and non-Christians did these events, these activities in the same numbers. Gambling, visiting a pornographic website, taking something that didn't belong to them, saying mean things behind someone's back, consulting a medium or a psychic, having a physical fight or abusing someone, using illegal drugs, saying something to someone that's not true, getting back at something for something they did, consuming enough alcohol to be considered legally drunk. There was no statistical difference in these 10 areas of a person's life. The only area Christians did less common than non-Christians, and this is not a joke, was recycling. Like, what are we doing? We're acting the same. We got a generation saying, I don't want to believe the gospel because of this. We got to tell them, listen, it's not about us, man. We are beggars telling other beggars where to get bread. We are dependent on the grace of Jesus. Do not look to us. Do not look to me as a leader. I will fumble it. I will let you down. I will fail you. Look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. I am a co-laborer with God. I am not the one in charge of this. Point people to Jesus. It's not about us. It's not about you. And he makes the same point here. Look, it's been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. So this is a way of saying the Bible is the thing that has actually told us what God is about. If you want to know what God thinks about sexuality, about marriage, about money, it's the Bible that you actually look to and you say, here's God. This is what theologians call the special revelation of God. God has made it known through the Bible. And what he's saying here is, look, we want to go deep as a church into the Bible. Right? We don't want to just we don't just get to come up with Christianity on a whim. We don't just walk around and go, I don't know what to think about stuff. I'll just think this up. Now there's some churches, some Christians, some leaders that are like that. They don't want to go deep. They just want to go broad. So they'll let you believe whatever you want to believe, but that's not the Bible. I read one quote from one guy today. He said, there's a lot of preachers today. They spend more money on their clothing and their wardrobe than they do on their libraries. They don't want to know stuff, know theology, understand history. They're just like want to look good and get on stage and go, dee, 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 dee. And then everyone's like, oh, I want to follow this person. And he's going, you want to know what God thinks about things? You want to know the plan of God? You don't get to just make it up. You have to look to the Bible. The law and the prophets actually testify to this story. And what do they say? What do they say is they testified to the fact that the righteousness of God has been made known. And he's going to talk about this, has been made known, what's been made known, Jesus himself. That there's been this ecosystem. There's been this like domino effect where Genesis led to Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, started into the prophets, started into the writing. All of the Bible was testifying and pointing to this particular person. It was a domino. It's like, have you guys seen Good Will Hunting? All right, so now I'm more of kind of like, I'm not the sports analogy guy. All right, so for those of you like the sports analogies, I don't even know what to say. I'm just like, LeBron did a three-pointer? I don't know. But I do the art stuff. So I watch a lot of movies, all right? So there's this speech in Good Will Hunting that I memorized years ago. I don't know if I still got it, but basically, they sit Will down, and he's a brilliant mathematician, and they want him to work for the National Security Agency so he can crack code. And so they offer him all this money. He says, why should I work for the National Security Agency? Interesting question. Well, say somebody puts a code on my desk, something nobody else can break, and I take a shot at it, and maybe I break it, and I'm happy with myself because I did my job well, but what if that code was the location of some rebel army in North Africa, the Middle East, and now I bomb a village, and 1,500 people I never had a problem with get killed. Now they're saying sending the Marines to secure the area. They don't care. It won't be their kid over there getting shot. Just like it wasn't them when their number got called because they was pulling a tour in the National Guard. It'll be some kid from Southie going over there, taking shrapnel in the butt, and come back to find out his job just got shipped to the country he came from because they'll work for 15 cents a day and no bathroom breaks. And of course, they're bringing the oil over from that country, probably taking their sweet time, probably hired some alcoholic skipper who likes to drink martinis and play slalom with the icebergs. Ain't too long until he hits one, spills the oil and kills all the sea life in the North Atlantic. Now my buddy's out of a job and he's walking to the doctor's appointments because the shrapnel in his butt, and he's hungry because every time he goes to get a bite to eat, the only blue plate special they're serving is North Atlantic scrawled with Quaker State. I figure, forget it. Why not just shoot my buddy, give his job to his sworn enemy, hike up gas prices, club a baby seal, hit the hash pipe, and join the National Guard? I could be elected president, right? And you're like, and then like the follow-up line is, are you happy, Will? All right, just like this. Because everything is this domino, right? Everything dominoes into other things. This leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. This happens all the time. You pull into a parking lot, guy went an inch over the thing, you gotta go over it, you gotta go over it, you gotta go over it. Here's the Apostle Paul. The law and the prophets are the biblical story that actually set up the story of Jesus. That's the domino effect. And what the Bible then says here is the whole Bible then is about this story about Jesus. Listen, there's only two ways you can read the Bible. And many of you have been reading it wrong your whole life. Because what you're told from a little kid is go into the Bible and you're gonna find stuff about you. And it's about how good you can be. And it's about being like Abraham, be like Moses, be like David. And you read the story of David and he goes out and he fights Goliath, and you gotta go out and slay the giants of your life. Slay the giant of financial need. Slay the giant of anxiety and fear and stress, and go out there and fight Goliath. And if you can work hard enough and be good enough, then maybe you can have victory. And that kind of preaching crushes you. Because you know you ain't David. I got a secret for you. David ain't David. You ever read that story? Do you know how to read that story? You ain't David in that story. I'll tell you who you are. You are the thousands of Israelites sitting up, deathly afraid, in the hills, shaking, hoping that someone will go and do something. And a faithful Israelite named Jesus has the victory over Satan, sin, and death, and then imputes that to you even though you did nothing. That's the way to read that story. It's not about, well, I'll pick up 5 stones and I'll fling them at my sin. No, you will fail and feel crushed every single time. Jesus had the victory. You read the Noah story. Be like Noah. What? You ever read the Noah story? Guys drunk, naked, running around. Don't be like Noah. I'll tell you what that story is about. And this is what the Apostle Paul is coming to realize. He's starting to realize what Jesus said in Luke 24 when he's walking around with those guys and he goes, you know, all the law and the prophets, they're about me. The Apostle Paul begins to realize that every story in the Bible whispers his name is actually about him. And so the Noah story becomes a story. What does God do? He judges the world, and then he puts a rainbow up in the sky. And what is that story about? In the Hebrew, the word for rainbow is warbow. He hangs it up in the sky because he's pointing it. He's saying, I'm not gonna let my wrath go down again until, where's the archery bow facing? Up into the heart of heaven. That one day I'm gonna come and take the arrow for you. Because every story is shot through with Jesus. Your Bible's not about you. It's about him. This is what Paul, the whole thing is testifying to this gospel that I'm giving you. And if you choose to keep making it about you, it will crush you. And it's silly. And here's what I mean by that. So my oldest daughter's almost 16. So years ago, we went for, you go for the sonogram or whatever, where the baby's in there. And this was our first kid. So we were like, dude, black and white ain't good enough. All right, little sounds. And there was this one thing called UC Baby. And we could get this baby in 3 dimensions. We want to see who it looks like. And there's Mozart music going, all right? And you're in the room for an hour. You're basically playing with the baby. It's 4 months old in there, and it's a 3-dimensional baby with colors, and it's crazy. So we're like, and when you leave, they give you this DVD. And so we would sit for 6 months and just watch this DVD. It's like, look at it, and the Mozart music, and we're just like, look at this baby, this is great. Wouldn't it be weird if once Sienna was born, it was like, hey, you want to hold your baby? No, I'm just going to put this DVD in. Look at this, come here, look at this DVD. It's like the thing that the pointer was pointing to has arrived. And Paul's going, guys, if you refuse our own story, you are just sitting watching DVDs when the reality has come. And some of you stop and you're people of the word, and that's good. And what the gospel is trying to say is, I want you to have a relationship with the word behind the word. The big W, Jesus himself, the one that all the stories are about. And so when you're reading in your Bible and your devos, and Jesus is hanging out with the hookers, and you're in the morning and you're sipping your coffee, who are you in that story every time? You're Jesus, who's gonna hang out with the hookers of your neighborhood or at work. You're the hooker. You are the one who cheats on Jesus every single day of your life. And this is why he says this next. That was one verse. Okay. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile. And then the next verse, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. One of the great verses of all time. But one of the most offensive, because it tells us that we're sinful. It tells us that we're actually in need of something. The word sin literally means to miss the target, like an archery term. You miss the target altogether. And it's extremely offensive in our culture today to start out with a position that we're sinful and in need of saving because we think we've got it together. And New Ageism tells us we've got it together. New Age philosophy tells you the divine spark is inside of you. Just go inside of yourself and you will find it. Dallas Willard years ago, a philosopher, he's passed away now, he says, we are all willing to admit that we lie, but not that we're liars. Right? We do not believe this about ourselves, that we have sinned. And the reality is, this is where the brokenness comes from. You look at the 20th century. I mean, even from a sociological perspective, the 20th century, we killed more human beings in the 20th century than any century before that combined. Through all the wars, 100 million people we killed in the 1900s. In 2 weeks, my grandfather is gonna be 100 years old. 100! I mean, I got good genes, right? I'm gonna outlive everybody in here. He turns 100 years old. That means in his lifetime, he saw us kill 100 million of each other. World War I, World War II, genocides, Russia, China, all the Khmer Rouge, 100 million. And then we got to the end of the 20th century and philosophy decided that there is no such thing as evil. That's scary. Relativism told us there's no evil, there's just choice. After the bloodiest century on the planet. And as one writer has said, I believe, church, that this is our wake-up call. You're just gonna let that reality go where we need to convince people that sin is a real thing. Now, some people say, yeah, but sin is, like if you're a skeptic and you're here, you're watching this, awesome, glad you're here, that was me growing up. You might say, saying something is sinful or somebody is actually harmful for them. Like it's bad psychologically to tell a child that they're sinful, where we all know it's literally their whole life is just sin. They're the most conniving little, but it's mean to maybe call human sinful. But actually psychologists find it very helpful. Ernest Becker, who wrote a book that won a Pulitzer Prize in 1974, puts it this way. He says, the plight of the modern therapeutic individual is this, that he or she is a sinner with no word for it, or worse, who looks for the word for it in a dictionary of psychology, and thus only aggravates the problem of his separateness. All the analysis in the world doesn't allow the person to find out who he is and why he has to die. It is when psychology rather than theology pretends to do this that it becomes a fraud and an impasse from which man cannot escape. We know inside of us that we're failing and we need to do something about it. And we know the shame and the guilt goes away when you actually find out there's a word for it. It's called sin. So then you can go, okay, I get it now. I'm not crushed with the shame and the guilt and the burden of having to save everybody. But the first step to that is it's really hard to admit that, right? As a culture, it's really hard. So those of you who've heard me preach before, I talk about, I've got Tourette syndrome, which is why you see my face, doing weird things, and obsessive compulsive disorder. So I do these weird tics and these habits. And so my obsessive compulsive disorder basically makes it so like I have to like hit certain things a certain amount of times or do whatever. So there's this thing that I do where when I grab like a light bulb or something, I squeeze it to like its breaking point. And then I try to let it go. But I'll break them. Like my wife, she's just stopped asking me to change light bulbs. It's just like, it's expensive. It's like, so someone puts a wine glass in my hand, I'm listening for the, and then I'll stop. It's just something I do, it's crazy. So I remember my kids are super young, and it was around Easter, and they'd all worked on they had these eggs. And they're at home, they're like literally 4 years old, 5 years old, and they blow the yolk out and paint the eggs. And I literally, it's a true story, I came home from work, Daddy, look at my egg. I'm like, this is so beautiful. And my wife walks in and says, what are you doing? I'm like, what? She's like, dude, you got a problem. And I'm like, no, I don't. I'm fine. Literally, no joke, 5 minutes later, my youngest one comes up, Dad, wait a minute, Dad, the egg. I'm like, this is beautiful. The first step is admitting it, y'all. We can walk in denial our whole life and live in this echo chamber of our own convincing and not ever realize that we are actually sinful and in need of saving. And so how are we saved? We're justified freely by, he says, 3 things. First, his grace, right? The Greek word charis, you know what it means? Undeserved favor. You are caught red-handed in sin, and in the face of karma, you know what karma would say as a worldview? You get what you deserve. Grace says, no, Jesus got what you deserve. You get what you don't deserve. That's the beauty of the cross. It's called the great exchange, theologians call it. He put your sin onto Jesus, and if you believe in Jesus, you get his righteousness. But grace, undeserved favor. I remember, here's the image that always pops in my mind when I hear this word grace, undeserved, caught red. So I just got my license, so I'm 18, 19 years old. My mom goes, here's your car, 88 Grand Am, all right? This thing probably went 110 at tops, right? So I'm driving, and I'm going 20 over and something, and I look at this, is like I've had my license for a year, and I look back, and I see red cop lights. And no joke, instead of stopping, I start to speed up. And then I did a quick turn. And all of a sudden I realize I am in a full, a chase with a cop. I'm in OJ land, all right, at this point. I am freaking going, all right? I'm going left, I'm going right, I'm going under stuff. I'm going, and I'm like, this guy's like, what the heck are you admitting this for? It's like, I'm like, what am I doing? I can't outrun a cop. And so I've turned left, turned right, he's coming, and I'm like, okay, I just gotta do something. So I pulled over to the side of the road, I got out, I popped my trunk, and I reached inside my thing, and I pulled out this box, and I'm like, he just goes, and he pulls up, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just bringing this box to my buddy's house right here. And he's like, that's your buddy's house? Yeah, it's Tom. Didn't you see? No, I was just going to Tom's. He's like, that's why you went left, right, 14 different streets. Yeah, I just dropped in this box at Tom's. He's like, okay, go ahead, I'll watch. And I'm like, okay. And then ding dong. And I'm like, if a lady comes to the door, there's no Tom, right? I don't know what this is. Ding dong. No one comes to the door. I'm like, okay, I'll just leave this box here, Tom. I get back, he looks at me, he's like, really? This is Tom's house, huh? I'm like, yeah. He goes, okay. And with this twinkle in his eye, he goes, slow down next time, kid. And he smiles and he gets in his car and he drives away. That's the picture of grace, y'all. You are caught red-handed, dead. And for some reason, grace, this ain't you, this is about the goodness of him. And then he says it's through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. Guys, this is the only way to be justified. This is the only way to be forgiven of sin. No other religion will do it. And I know we like to think, all of the religions lead to heaven, all religions lead to God. They don't. Jesus came, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He didn't even say just he's the path and the way to God. He's like, I'm the path. I'm God himself. And every other religion can't get you there. And we love to do that as a culture. We love to have Ricky Bobby theology, right? You guys seen the Ballad of Ricky Bobby, right? Where he's on fire and he's running around and he's like, help me, Jewish God. Help me, Oprah. Help me, Tom Cruise. And what is he doing? He's hedging his bets that one of them may actually be God to help him. And that's what we do. We go, all religions will save you. Hedge your bets. Believe in everything. And Paul just went, guys, this is it. Just Jesus and Jesus alone. And what about Jesus? I'll leave you with this. The thing about Jesus is God presents him as a sacrifice of atonement. You needed your sins atoned for. Your sin had to be paid for. And all the gods and the fires and the religions and the fluffy lambs that we killed, all of it was pointing here. And Jesus came as a sacrifice of atonement to end all of religion. Eastern ways, Western ways, any religion trying to earn your way to God, he comes and he actually ends it as a sacrifice of atonement. Now, he of course proclaims from the cross, it is finished. It is finished. And you know what? One of the hardest things to believe in our life, that's actually true. Because here's what we do. It's Jesus plus who you vote for. It's Jesus plus what you think about race. It's Jesus plus what you think about politics. Fill in the blank. Jesus plus. I've got to add to it. There's no way it's finished. And he declares, man, from the cross, it is done. It is over. I have accomplished this. You can add nothing to it. And when you try, it's heresy. Now, here's the problem. The whole thing ends like this. Through the shedding of his blood. This is what did it. God, through the Old Testament, you got to shed the blood to atone for the sin. And then it says this, and this is where it leaves it with us. It has to be received by faith, though. You got to do something about it. You can't just leave it sitting there. You know, at the church that I come from Vancouver, Village Church, lots of people come on Easter and Christmas. Church doubles in size. And they show up, and I usually say to them, thanks for being here, but what are you doing here? Did you just come here and you won't come next week? Because it's really the silliest thing you could do. I would rather you picket my church because I'm telling all these people lies, or give your life to Jesus and join the church. The one thing you can't do is show up this week, go back to work on Monday as if everything I just said was a nice idea and you're not going to do anything with it. Because the thing that might be holding you back from doing something with it isn't that you're smarter than everyone in the room, it's that you're a coward. It's you are afraid of what the people at work are going to say about you tomorrow morning. You're afraid of what your spouse might think. You're afraid of what your friend, your neighbor, your kid might think. Here's what the Apostle Paul says. It all comes down to, are you going to receive this gift of grace by faith or leave it unopened? And I would pray, Father, in this moment, everyone watching this at all the campuses, that the clarity of this gospel would cut deep to the heart, and without distraction, people who have never received it by faith would give their life to you right now by praying, Jesus, I understand you are the atonement for my sin. You are the one who actually took on the wrath of God. You are the one who died in my place as my substitute. And I want to receive it by faith in you and be given eternal life in this moment versus trying to do it on my own. And those of us who already know Jesus, of your sacrifice and live in light of it, let us treasure it deeper today, because we got to the center of the Bible and realized it was you all along, wooing us, loving us, dying for us, so that we might have life in your name. In Jesus' great name we pray. Amen.